My name is Sarah Miller, and I've been a nurse for 6 years. I work in the oncology department of St. Matthew's Hospital, a sprawling brick building on the east side of the city that smells like disinfectant and coffee no matter where you go. It's not the kind of place people dream about working when they're kids. No one plays pretend by hooking their dolls up to IV lines or explaining chemotherapy regimens to stuffed animals. But somehow, this became my world. I was 22 when I walked across the stage at nursing school graduation, my family cheering from the audience, my white cap slipping off my head. At the time, I thought I would end up in pediatrics. I loved kids. I had a niece who thought I hung the moon, and I thought helping children would be the purest form of good I could do with my life. But when I applied to hospitals, pediatrics had a long waiting list, and oncology had openings. I told myself it would be temporary. 6 years later, I was still here. Oncology is not for the faint of heart. Some days, I would leave the hospital feeling hollowed out, as if someone had scooped my insides with a spoon. I would drive home with the radio off, watching the blur of traffic lights through tired eyes, and wonder if I was strong enough to keep doing this. But then there were the good days. The days when a patient's scan came back clean, when a mother got to hear her teenage son's cancer was in remission, when someone rang the brass bell in the hallway that marked the end of treatment. Those days stitched me back together again. Most of my patients stayed for weeks or months. Chemotherapy isn't a quick fix. It's a marathon, and sometimes a brutal one. We grew attached to one another. They knew my face, my voice, the way I hummed absent-mindedly while I changed IV bags. I knew their favorite foods, their children's names, the way they liked their pillows fluffed. It wasn't just medicine I gave them. It was presence, and they gave me something to perspective. It was mid-March when Michael came in. I remember because outside the hospital, the first signs of spring were finally showing after a brutal winter. Crocuses pushed up through patches of stubborn snow, and I had left my heavier coat at home that morning, choosing a lighter jacket even though the air was still sharp with cold. I was walking into my shift with a coffee in hand when I saw the ambulance unload him. At first, I didn't pay much attention. New patients arrived every day, sometimes by ambulance, sometimes escorted by family. But later that morning, when I checked the chart for room 512, his name stood out: Michael Grant. Age 34. Stage 4, osteosarcoma. Prognosis, 12-18 months. There it was, written in sterile black ink on a digital chart. A countdown on a man's life. Numbers that no amount of hard work, optimism, or medical brilliance could erase. When I first walked into his room, he was sitting upright in the bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked too healthy to belong here. That was the first thought that struck me. Most of our patients looked frail, their skin pale or their frames whittled thin by months of treatment. But Michael looked normal. His hair was thick and dark, his skin tanned like he spent time outdoors, and there was an athletic sharpness to his shoulders under the hospital gown. "Good morning," I said, forcing the professional brightness into my voice that I always used on first introductions. "I'm Sarah, one of the nurses here. How are you settling in?" He looked up at me, his eyes the kind of green that made me catch my breath before I could stop myself. He smiled, but it wasn't a real smile, it was tight, a shield. "Settling into a hospital room? I guess as well as anyone can." I returned his smile gently. "Fair enough. Can I get you anything? Water? An extra blanket?" He shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." I noted the politeness. Many patients weren't polite on their first day. Fear and pain have a way of stripping away manners. But he said thank you, and I tucked that away in my mind. Over the next few days, I learned more. He was 34, a graphic designer who freelanced from home. He had lived in Portland until recently, then moved back to our city to be closer to family when the diagnosis came. He had a younger sister, Hannah, who visited almost daily, bringing him home-cooked meals he rarely ate but always appreciated. His parents were alive but lived 2 states away. He had no wife, no kids. The thing about oncology patients is that, over time, they all begin to reveal themselves in layers. Some stay closed for weeks, letting you see only the surface. Others open up right away, pouring out fears and stories as if you've known them your whole life. Michael was somewhere in between. He wasn't a chatterbox, but when I asked him questions, he answered with more than one-word responses. One night, toward the end of my shift, I went in to check his vitals. He was watching a basketball game on the mounted TV, the sound low. "You a fan?" I asked, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm. "Yeah," he said. "Trailblazers. Not much to cheer for lately, but I stay loyal." I laughed softly. "My brother's a die-hard Bulls fan. He yells at the TV like they can hear him." Michael grinned, and this time it reached his eyes. "That sounds familiar." Moments like that reminded me that my patients weren't just patients. They were whole people, with teams they rooted for, favorite foods, silly quirks. Cancer threatened to erase that, reducing them to diagnoses and prognoses, but underneath, they were still themselves. I didn't realize then how much Michael would change me. It started small, the way he asked about my day when I came into his room, when most patients barely noticed the nurses rotating in and out. The way he cracked dry jokes that caught me off guard, making me laugh in the middle of sterile routines. One afternoon, I brought him his medication, and he was sketching in a notebook. The lines were clean, precise, forming what looked like the early stages of a city skyline. "Wow," I said, pausing at the edge of his bed. "You draw?" He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, occupational hazard, I guess. Keeps my mind off things." "Can I see?" I asked, surprising even myself. I usually didn't pry beyond what patients offered. He hesitated, then turned the notebook toward me. The sketch was beautiful, a cityscape with buildings stretching toward an invisible sky, every detail sharp, alive with movement. "This is incredible," I said honestly. He looked away, muttering, "It's just something to do." But I could tell it mattered to him, that I noticed. From then on, I noticed his sketches more often. A street corner, a bridge, the curve of a woman's hand resting on a coffee cup. He had an eye for life, for details most people overlooked. And slowly, without meaning to, I started looking forward to seeing him. It wasn't romantic. Not at first. It was more like gravity, something pulling me toward him, even as I told myself I needed to stay professional, that he was a patient, that this was temporary. But late at night, when I went home to my quiet apartment and lay in bed, his face would flicker across my mind. The way he laughed when he forgot himself. The way his green eyes softened when he talked about his sister. The way he still said thank you, even on the days when the pain made him short-tempered. And I began to wonder what it meant. This connection forming in a place built on suffering. By the end of his second week, Michael's condition worsened slightly. His pain spiked, and his body resisted the medications more stubbornly. I saw the frustration in him, the way he clenched his jaw when he thought no one noticed. One night, I walked in and found him staring at the ceiling in the dark. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't startle him. He turned his head, the faint glow from the hallway spilling across his face. "Not really. Pain's worse tonight." I adjusted his IV, checked the dosages, offered what little comfort I could. Then, without planning to, I sat down in the chair by his bed. "Do you want me to stay for a bit?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Yeah, if you don't mind." So I sat there, the room quiet except for the hum of machines. I watched his breathing slow as he drifted closer to sleep, and something inside me ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. This was dangerous, I knew. Nurses aren't supposed to blur lines, but sometimes the heart doesn't care about rules. That night, as I drove home under a sky full of stars, I realized something had shifted. Michael wasn't just another patient. He was becoming something more, and I didn't know what to do about it. The next morning, I tried to act normal, professional, detached, the way we were trained to be. But the truth was, the night before had cracked something open inside me. Sitting by Michael's bed, hearing his breathing ease just because I was there, felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced in years. And I couldn't simply put that back in a box. At the nurse's station, I caught myself glancing at his room number more often than usual. I reminded myself of boundaries, of ethics, of the 100 ways this could end badly. Yet when I finally walked into his room, coffee cup in hand, I felt my chest loosen just a little. "Good morning," I said. He looked up from his sketch pad. His hair was messy, sticking up in odd angles, and he looked younger that way. "Morning. You survived another night shift?" I smiled. "Barely, but caffeine helps." I lifted the cup in mock toast. His lips curved. "If I ask nicely, do I get one of those someday?" I raised an eyebrow. "You think you can bribe your nurse with coffee?" "Not bribery," he said, pretending to look offended. "More like mutual survival strategy." I laughed, shaking my head as I checked his vitals. "We'll see." The days blurred together in the hospital, but with Michael, I began to notice the small moments more vividly, like how he asked about my weekend plans, even though he knew most of my weekends were filled with laundry and sleeping in, or the way he teased me when I hummed under my breath, demanding I tell him what song was stuck in my head. He had a dry sense of humor that sneaked up on you. One afternoon, I caught him making faces at the IV pump when it beeped incessantly. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying not to laugh. "Intimidation," he said with mock seriousness. "If I glare at it long enough, maybe it'll shut up." I snorted, shaking my head. "That's not how machines work." "You'd be surprised," he muttered. "My old toaster used to behave better when I yelled at it." That time, I couldn't stop laughing, and the sound filled the sterile room like a burst of sunlight. One evening, his sister Hannah was visiting when I came in. She was younger than him by about 5 years, with the same green eyes but a softer face. She had brought a bag of homemade soup and was fussing over him as he tried to assure her he wasn't starving. "Michael," she scolded, "you're skin and bones." "I'm fine, Han, stop worrying." "You're my brother. I get to worry," she shot back. I cleared my throat lightly, and they both looked up. Hannah's expression softened when she saw me. "You must be Sarah. He talks about you." Heat rose in my cheeks before I could stop it. "All good things, I hope." Michael groaned. "Oh my God, Hannah, don't embarrass me." She grinned mischievously. "I'll leave you two to it. I have to get back to work anyway." As she packed up, she leaned toward me and whispered conspiratorially, "He likes you. Don't let him fool you." I froze, caught between surprise and something dangerously close to hope. By the time I turned back, she was gone, and Michael was glaring at the door. "Sorry about her," he muttered. "She has no filter." I forced a light laugh, focusing on adjusting his IV. Siblings, that's their job. But my hands trembled slightly as I worked. The truth was, I had been alone for a long time. My last serious relationship had ended 3 years ago, when my boyfriend at the time admitted he couldn't handle my hours or the emotional weight of my job. Since then, I had thrown myself into work, convincing myself I didn't have the energy or time for love. But with Michael, it was different. I didn't go looking for this. Yet every time I walked into his room, I felt something stir that I had almost forgotten existed. A hunger, not just for romance, but for connection. Still, I fought it. For weeks, I told myself it was just compassion, just professional closeness. Nurses care, that's what we do. But deep down, I knew it was more. And one night, it became impossible to ignore. It was late, close to midnight, and most of the ward was quiet. I had just finished checking on another patient when I noticed Michael's light still on. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. He was awake, propped against the pillows, sketching again. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my breath catch. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly. "Not really. The pain's better tonight, but my brain won't shut off." I sat down in the chair without asking. "What are you drawing?" He hesitated, then handed me the notebook. It was a portrait of me. My breath caught. He had captured me mid-laugh, hair pulled back messily, eyes crinkled. The lines were so tender, so precise, it felt like seeing myself through someone else's heart. "You drew me," I whispered. He looked down, suddenly shy. "Sorry. I should have asked. You were laughing that day, and I wanted to remember it." I stared at the sketch, my throat tight. No one had ever looked at me like this before, let alone put it on paper. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "Thank you." Silence stretched between us, thick with something unsaid. Then, quietly, he added, You make this place less awful. You know that? The words hit me deep. I wanted to say something professional, something safe, but all that came out was, "You make my days better too." His eyes held mine, unflinching, and for a moment, the hospital walls, the machines, the charts, all of it disappeared. There was only him. I stood abruptly, heart racing. I should get back to work." He nodded, but I saw the flicker of disappointment before he masked it. As I walked out, my hands trembled, and I knew the line between nurse and patient had already blurred beyond repair. After that night, everything shifted. I tried to keep my distance, but the pull was too strong. When he smiled, I smiled back without hesitation. When he teased me, I teased him right back. When he sketched, I lingered to watch. One afternoon, he asked, "What made you become a nurse?" The question caught me off guard. I was so used to asking about patients' lives that I rarely shared my own. "I thought I'd go into pediatrics," I admitted, but life had other plans. I ended up here instead. "Do you regret it?" I thought about all the times I'd driven home in tears, about the patients I'd lost, the funerals I'd attended. And then I thought about the hugs, the bell ringing, the moments of triumph. "No," I said finally. "It's hard. Sometimes unbearably hard. But it matters. That's enough." He studied me quietly, then said, "You're stronger than you think." The words lingered with me long after I left his room. By late April, his condition had plateaued. He still had pain, but he was stable. Enough that he was allowed to go home for short periods, with Hannah checking in constantly. On the days he wasn't at the hospital, I found myself missing him more than I wanted to admit. One Saturday, I was off work when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Hey, it's Michael. Hope you don't mind, Hannah gave me your number. I just wanted to say hi." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Patients didn't text nurses. That was another line, another rule. And yet, I typed back, "Hi, how are you feeling today?" We ended up texting for hours. About nothing and everything. Music, movies, food cravings. He sent me a picture of one of his sketches, a tiny coffee shop corner, and teased me about owing him coffee. By the time I went to bed, I knew I was in trouble, because I didn't want to stop talking to him. The first time we saw each other outside the hospital wasn't planned. I was at the grocery store on a Sunday, hair pulled into a messy bun, pushing a cart of boring essentials, when I heard someone say my name. I turned, and there he was, Michael, standing by the produce section, leaning on a cane I hadn't seen before, his sister hovering protectively nearby. "Sarah," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Michael, hi. You shop here too?" he asked, as if this were the most ordinary coincidence in the world. I laughed nervously. "Yeah, small world." Hannah gave me a knowing look, then muttered something about needing to grab bread and disappeared down an aisle, leaving us alone. We stood there, surrounded by apples and oranges, both awkward and oddly giddy. "You look different," he said finally. "Not in scrubs. Normal clothes." I glanced down at my jeans and sweater. "This is as normal as it gets." "You look good," he said quietly. Heat rose in my cheeks, and I quickly shifted the subject. "How are you feeling?" "Okay," he said. "Tired, but better than some days." We chatted for a few minutes, and when Hannah reappeared, he gave me a small wave as they left. I stood in the produce aisle long after they were gone, my heart hammering in my chest. That night, he texted me, "You looked beautiful today." And for the first time in years, I let myself smile at my phone like a teenager. As the weeks passed, our connection deepened, both inside and outside the hospital. We texted daily, sometimes late into the night. When he was admitted again for treatments, I found myself lingering in his room a little longer than necessary, my heart skipping when he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I knew the risks. I knew this could end in heartbreak, that falling for a man with 18 months to live was reckless at best, devastating at worst. But the truth was, my heart was already gone. One evening, after finishing my shift, I found him sketching again. This time, it wasn't a city or a person. It was a hospital hallway, drawn in sharp detail, But in the center was a figure me walking down the corridor. "You keep drawing me," I said softly. He looked up, unflinching. "Because you're the only thing worth drawing here." The words hung in the air, raw and Love isn't supposed to happen like this. At least, that's what I always believed. It was supposed to begin in ordinary places, coffee shops, bookstores, chance encounters at work that didn't involve IV bags and oncologists. But life rarely follows the scripts we imagine. With Michael, love didn't fall into my lap all at once. It crept in quietly, built from small moments, like the way his face softened when I walked into the room, or the sound of his laugh when I said something sarcastic. It was the hours of late-night texts, the sketches of me in his notebook, the gentleness he showed despite his pain. By the beginning of May, there was no denying it anymore. I was in love with a dying man. And he was in love with me too. The confession came on a warm evening. He had been allowed to go home for a week between treatments, and he invited me timidly, almost apologetically, to stop by his apartment. "I know it's probably crossing a line," he had texted, "but I'd really like to see you outside of fluorescent lights." I stared at my phone for an hour before replying. Every part of me knew it was reckless, but I said yes anyway. His apartment was small but tidy, filled with plants and stacks of sketchbooks. The windows looked out over the city, and the evening sun slanted across the wooden floor. "You made it," he said when I walked in, smiling like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. "You sound surprised," I teased, but my heart was racing. He had made tea, though his hands trembled slightly as he poured it. We sat on the couch, awkward at first, like we weren't sure how to be ourselves without the buffer of hospital walls. But then he showed me his sketches, dozens of them, and the conversation flowed as easily as it always did. At one point, I laughed at something he said, and when I looked up, he was staring at me. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head slowly. I love that sound." The words slipped out of him unplanned. I could tell. His eyes widened slightly, as though he wanted to reel them back in. My breath caught. My instinct was to retreat, to remind us both of all the reasons this was impossible. But instead, I whispered, "Say it again." He swallowed hard. "I love you." It wasn't grand or poetic. It was raw, fragile, like he was offering me the last unbroken piece of himself. My throat tightened. "I love you too." Silence stretched, but it was a good silence, filled with something sacred. He reached for my hand, and when our fingers touched, it felt like falling and flying all at once. From that night on, we stopped pretending. We were careful in the hospital, still maintaining the appearance of nurse and patient. But outside those walls, we were just Sarah and Michael. We went for short walks when he was able, stopping often to let him catch his breath. We ordered takeout and ate on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. He showed me his old design projects, laughing at how dated they looked, and I told him stories about my childhood, about the summers I spent chasing fireflies in my grandparents' backyard. Every moment felt stolen, borrowed from a clock we couldn't stop, but that only made them more precious. One night, we sat on his couch, his head resting against my shoulder, the hum of the city outside the window. "Do you ever regret this?" he asked quietly. I frowned. "Regret what?" "Us. Letting this happen. Knowing how it ends." I turned my face toward him, brushing my lips against his hair. "I don't regret a single second. Do you?" He was silent for a long moment, then shook his head. "No. You make this life worth the time I have left." The words broke me open, but I held him tighter, as if I could keep him here by sheer will. Of course, not everyone understood. When Hannah found out the full extent of our relationship, she confronted me. "You're his nurse," she said, her voice sharp with protective anger. "This isn't fair to either of you." I swallowed hard. "I know it's unconventional, but I love him, and he loves me." She crossed her arms. "And what happens when he's gone? What then, Sarah? You're going to be shattered." Tears pricked my eyes, but I met her gaze. "I'd rather have months with him than a lifetime without ever knowing what this feels like." Her expression softened, just slightly. She sighed, shaking her head. "You really love him, don't you?" "Yes." I whispered, more than I thought was possible. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Okay, then I'll trust you to take care of him. But if you hurt him, I won't, I promised. Not ever, and I meant it. As spring turned into summer, Michael's health began to waver again. The pain grew sharper, the fatigue heavier. Some days, he barely had the energy to get out of bed. I tried to stay strong, to be the steady presence he needed. But inside, I was terrified. One evening, he looked at me across the dim light of his bedroom, his face pale with exhaustion. "I don't want you to see me like this," he murmured. "Like what?" I asked softly. "Dying." I crawled onto the bed beside him, taking his hand in mine. "I don't see you as dying, Michael. I see you as living, right here, right now, with me." His eyes filled with tears, and he pressed his forehead against mine. "God, I love you. I love you too," I whispered, my voice breaking. And in that moment, we weren't nurse and patient, or caretaker and sufferer. We were just two people clinging to each other against the tide. We started making lists of things he wanted to do while he still could. Nothing extravagant, he wasn't strong enough for big adventures, but small things that brought joy. "Go to the beach," he said one day. "I want to feel sand again." So one Saturday, Hannah and I drove him to the shore. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, but when his feet touched the sand, his face lit up like a child's. We sat together, the three of us, watching the waves roll in, the salty air tangling my hair. Michael closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and whispered, "Perfect." "Another time," he said, "I want to cook dinner for you. A real dinner." "Michael, you can barely stand some days," I protested. "Then you'll help me," he insisted. So we did. We cooked pasta in his tiny kitchen, bumping into each other, laughing when the sauce splattered everywhere. It wasn't gourmet, but it was ours. And when we sat down to eat, his hand found mine across the table, and I thought, I could live in this moment forever. But time has a way of reminding you it doesn't stop. By late July, the doctor's words hung heavier in the air. The treatments weren't slowing the cancer anymore. The prognosis they had whispered months ago loomed closer with every passing day. I tried to stay brave, but at night, when I went home to my empty apartment, I would curl up on the floor and cry until I couldn't breathe. Loving him was the best thing that had ever happened to me, and it was also breaking me piece by piece. One night, after a particularly rough day where he could barely keep food down, he caught my hand and held it tightly. "Promise me something," he said, his voice weak but steady. "Anything. When I'm gone, don't let this destroy you. Don't stop living." Tears blurred my vision. "Don't talk like that, Sarah." His grip tightened. "Promise me." I swallowed hard, my chest aching. "I promise." But in my heart, I didn't know how I would survive losing him. Still, even with the shadow hanging over us, there was light. Every day with him felt like a gift wrapped in fragile paper. We watched movies, read books aloud, sat on his balcony with mugs of tea. We made each other laugh even through pain. We whispered, "I love you," in the dark, as though saying it enough times could anchor him to this world. And somewhere inside I knew, love like this doesn't vanish, even when the body does. But knowing that didn't make the thought of goodbye any less unbearable. Summer blurred into August, heavy with heat and dread. The city sweltered under thick, humid air, and inside the hospital, the air conditioning struggled to keep up. The oncology ward was full, every room carrying its own silent battles. But for me, the world had narrowed to one man. Michael's decline was gradual, then sudden like a cliff hidden by mist. One week he was walking slowly with his cane, insisting on making his own tea. The next, he could barely get out of bed without help. His pain medications were increased, then increased again, until I lost track of how many adjustments had been made. And still, he smiled for me. Still, he asked about my day. Still, he sketched when he could, even if his hands trembled. One afternoon, I found him hunched over his notebook, struggling to hold the pencil steady. "Hey," I said softly, easing down on the chair beside his bed. "You don't have to push yourself," He looked up, his eyes tired but determined. I want to finish this. I glanced at the paper. It was a sketch of me again, this time not laughing, but sitting by his bedside, my head tilted toward him, concern etched into my features. "You see me too much," I murmured, brushing a tear from my cheek. "I don't see you enough," he whispered. I took the pencil gently from his shaking hand and set it aside, then curled into the bed beside him. He wrapped his arm weakly around me, and I breathed him in, memorizing everything. At work, I was torn in two. On the one hand, I was his nurse professional, composed, steady. On the other, I was his partner breaking inside, holding back tears every time I checked his vitals. My colleagues began to notice, though they didn't say much. A few gave me sympathetic looks, and I wondered if they all knew. One night, Dr. Patel, the lead oncologist, pulled me aside. "Sarah," she said gently, "I need to talk to you about Michael." My stomach dropped. "What about him? You know his time is getting shorter. We're looking at months now, maybe less. His family is aware. I just want to make sure you're prepared." Prepared. As if anyone could ever be prepared for this. I nodded stiffly. "I understand." Her eyes softened. "You care for him deeply." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted, my voice breaking. She touched my arm gently. "Then make the time count. That's all any of us can do." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I'm trying." And I was. Every day, I tried to make it count. By September, Michael was mostly at home, with hospice nurses visiting regularly. I adjusted my schedule to be there as often as I could, balancing my shifts at the hospital with long nights by his side. We learned to live in slow motion. Breakfasts were simple toast, tea, sometimes fruit if he could manage it. Afternoons were for naps, sometimes shared, sometimes just me sitting beside him, reading aloud while he drifted. Evenings were quiet, filled with movies he half-watched, my hand resting in his. One night, as the cicadas buzzed outside his window, he turned to me and said, "I don't want to die in the hospital." Tears stung my eyes, but I nodded. "Okay, then you won't. You'll be here, with me, with Hannah. Promise?" "Promise." His shoulders relaxed, and he closed his eyes. "Good, because I don't want my last memory to be fluorescent lights." My chest ached. "Then it won't be." In the rare moments of strength, he still surprised me. One late afternoon, he insisted we go outside. Hannah and I helped him down to the courtyard of his building, where the fading sun cast everything in gold. He sat on a bench, leaning heavily against me, and looked up at the sky. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It is," I agreed. He turned his head, his lips brushing my hair. "No, you're beautiful." I bit back a sob, holding him tighter. We never talked about marriage, not seriously. There wasn't time, and Michael didn't want ceremonies or formalities. But one evening, he pressed something small into my hand. It was a simple silver ring, slightly tarnished. "What's this?" I asked, my throat tight. "My mom's," he said softly. "She gave it to me years ago. I was saving it. For someone. I guess I was waiting for you." Tears blurred my vision. "Michael, I know it's not official," he interrupted. "But will you wear it? For me?" I slid the ring onto my finger, my hands trembling. "Always," he smiled weakly. "Then that's enough." And it was. More than enough. As autumn crept in, so did the inevitable. Michael grew weaker, his body betraying him piece by piece. His voice grew softer, his eyes more shadowed. Nights became harder, filled with pain even the strongest medications couldn't always quiet. I stayed with him through it all, holding his hand, whispering love into the dark. One night, when the pain was particularly brutal, he gripped my hand and gasped, "I don't want you to remember me like this." I kissed his forehead, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I'll remember you every way, laughing, drawing, teasing me, loving me, all of it, always." His eyes searched mine, desperate. "Promise me you'll keep living when I can't." I nodded, though the words caught in my throat. "I promise." In late October, the doctors told us it was close. Days, maybe weeks. Hannah cried in the kitchen while I sat by his side, holding his frail hand, memorizing every line of his face. We spent his last good day on the balcony, bundled in blankets, watching the leaves fall like fire from the trees. He leaned against me, eyes half closed, and whispered, "This is perfect." And for a moment, it was. Perfect, even in the shadow of goodbye. The night he slipped away was quiet. He had been fading all day, drifting in and out of sleep, his breathing shallow. Hannah and I sat on either side of him, holding his hands. The hospice nurse checked in gently, but mostly it was just us, his family, his love. As the hours stretched, he stirred one last time, opening his eyes to look at me. "I love you," he whispered, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "I love you too," I said, my voice breaking. His eyes lingered on mine, soft and full of peace. Then he exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, and didn't take another. The room fell still. I pressed my forehead against his hand, sobbing quietly, while Hannah wept on the other side. And just like that, he was gone. The days that followed blurred together. The funeral, the condolences, the hollow quiet of my apartment. Everywhere I turned, I saw him in the coffee shop we once laughed in the park where we walked slowly together, in the sketchbooks he left behind. But more than anything, I felt him inside me. His love, his laughter, his strength. One evening, weeks later, I sat on my balcony, staring at the city lights. I slipped the silver ring on my finger and whispered, "I kept my promise. I'm still here, still living." The grief was heavy, but beneath it, there was something else. A steady warmth, like a candle refusing to go out. Love doesn't vanish. It stays, reshaping you, carrying you forward. And though Michael was gone, he was with me still in every breath, every step, every heartbeat. The weeks after Michael's death stretched out like an endless gray road. At first, I moved through life as if underwater, everything muffled, distant, heavy. I woke up each morning with the same hollow ache in my chest, reaching instinctively for someone who wasn't there. The bed was too big. The apartment was too quiet. Even the air felt wrong, as if it refused to carry his laughter anymore. People tried to comfort me. Colleagues brought casseroles. Friends left messages on my phone. Hannah called nearly every day. But grief is a solitary thing. You can stand beside someone in it, but you can't climb inside their skin and feel it for them. And so, I carried it alone. At the hospital, I returned to my shifts, moving from patient to patient with practiced gentleness. My hands knew what to do, but my heart wasn't always present. I'd catch myself staring out windows, lost in memories of Michael's sketches or the way he said my name. More than once, I had to duck into the supply closet just to cry for 5 stolen minutes. Still, work grounded me. It reminded me why I'd chosen this life, because time is fragile, and people need someone to sit with them in the dark. Michael had once told me that I made the unbearable bearable. I tried to hold on to that. Hannah became my lifeline. She grieved too, her brother, her only sibling. But instead of pulling away, she drew closer. We met every Sunday, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at mine. We cooked meals, though half the time we barely ate. We looked through Michael's sketchbooks, tears streaking our cheeks as we touched each page like it was sacred. One afternoon, she handed me a sealed envelope. "He wanted you to have this," she whispered. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, Michael's handwriting uneven but unmistakable.
"Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I wanted to leave you something more than just drawings and memories. I wanted to leave you words. You were the light in my last days. You made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. You gave me love I never believed I deserved. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but I'm grateful for every second we did. Don't let my death close your heart. You still have so much life ahead. Keep loving, keep living, keep drawing breath like it matters, because it does. And when you look at the sky, know that I'm somewhere in it, smiling at you. Always yours, Michael."
By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. Hannah held me, crying too, the letter crushed between us like a fragile thing. I kept it in my bedside drawer, reading it on nights when the loneliness was unbearable. Each time, it hurt, but it also healed. Just a little. Seasons shifted. Winter came with its biting winds and early darkness. I decorated my apartment half-heartedly for Christmas, though the lights felt dim without him. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone on the balcony, a blanket wrapped around me, watching fireworks bloom over the city. "Happy New Year, Michael," I whispered into the night. The silence answered back, but in it, I imagined his voice. "Happy New Year, Sarah." By spring, the sharpest edge of grief had softened into something else. Not gone, it never would be, but woven into me. Part of my skin, my breath, my bones. I began to smile again, cautiously at first, then more freely. Not because the pain disappeared, but because love had left behind something durable. I went back to the little coffee shop where he used to meet me. I ordered tea, sat by the window, and let myself remember. It hurt, but it also felt like honoring him. One warm Saturday in April, I took his sketchbook to the park, the one he'd been working on when he got sick. Most pages were unfinished, pencil lines fading into blank space, but there was beauty in that too. I sat beneath a tree, flipping through it, tracing the curves of his drawings. A young couple passed by, holding hands, laughing. For a moment, envy stabbed at me, but then, strangely, peace followed. I had that. Maybe not for long, but I had it. And some people never do. Michael had taught me that love isn't measured in years, but in moments. One night, months after his passing, I dreamed of him. We were sitting on his balcony again, wrapped in blankets, the city lights twinkling below. He looked healthy, strong, his eyes bright with mischief. "You're doing okay," he said softly, as if he could see the future I was living without him. "I miss you," I whispered. "I know. I miss you too. But you're still here. That's enough." When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears, but my heart felt strangely lighter. Grief doesn't end. It changes shape. Some days it's sharp, other days it's a dull ache, and some days it's just a shadow in the background. But always, it's love, turned inside out. Michael was gone, but he was everywhere too. In the silver ring I still wore, in the sketches framed on my walls, in the laughter Hannah and I shared when we told stories about him. He was in me, always. The first spring without him, I planted a small garden on my balcony. Just herbs and a few flowers, nothing fancy. But it gave me comfort, watching life push through the soil, stubborn and green. Sometimes, when the evening light turned gold, I sat there with a cup of tea, staring at the plants swaying gently in the breeze, and I felt him. Not as a ghost, not as a haunting, but as a presence woven into the quiet. One evening, I whispered, "I kept living, Michael, just like you asked." And the wind rustled the leaves as if answering back. A year later, on the anniversary of his death, Hannah and I went to the park. We spread a blanket under a tree, shared sandwiches and tea, and spent the afternoon remembering him. At sunset, we lit a single candle and let it burn until the wax melted into the grass. "He'd like this," Hannah said softly. I nodded, tears in my eyes but a smile on my lips. Yeah, he would. As the sky deepened into twilight, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. Michael's life had been short, but it was full, and so was our love. And though my story would continue without him, it would always be shaped by him. Because love doesn't vanish. It lingers. It transforms. It becomes the thread that ties the past to the present, and the present to whatever comes next. And in that way, he was never really gone. That night, before bed, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the stars. I slipped the silver ring on my finger, pressed my hand to my heart, and whispered into the night, "I love you, always." And in the quiet stillness, I felt it, a warmth, a presence, a love that would never leave me. Michael was gone, but he was also here, forever,